in society. So maybe let me just address this at the very end, because what we're doing today has quite a bit to do with the direction that we shall take in the learning journey. So let me just share my screen, and then we can discuss exactly what I mean. So I'd like us to, our friends still coming. Just give people 2 minutes. Don't keep hearing that sound. People are trying to get in. Okay, but we had more time, so we had enough time to swivel from what we were doing to class. Parent or not. Anyway, I think we just start. So last time, um, so I'd like us to talk a little bit today around policy analysis. I think last time we started, I mentioned, that was probably like, what, 2 weeks ago? Things to do with policy, and I think the very beginning, we started discussing a bit now, I think, yeah, early last week, I think. But just to situate it, we started talking about strategy and the relationship between strategy and policy. Because sometimes we get a bit, people can get a bit mixed up. So just wanted clarity and what is the relationship between them. So strategy is at the very highest level, and it's a plan to achieve goals, for the organization. Um, so, for instance, an organization decides we want to be the top ranked university in Africa. Okay, so UN decides to say this is our overarching thing. University of Nairobi says they're a world class university. And so we say we want to make sure that in the next 5 years, we want to be the highly ranked university in Africa, okay? In terms of, lots of different things. So we are here, we're probably around, I don't know, maybe what, number 8 or number 9 or something in Africa. And so we want to make sure that at the end of the 5 years, it should be the first one. So what does that mean? That means we will have to make certain decisions. What does it, for instance, establish? What does it mean to be? What is the criteria for ranking? Maybe some of them would be what? Things like your research output. How much research are you releasing in terms of research papers to the top journals in the world? Okay, for instance, how much of the research output and inventions are being converted to IP, okay, intellectual property? How much of that is ultimately perhaps going into, is commercialized into products and services? For instance, you say, okay, what is the internationalization of the university? How many international students do you have? How many nations are represented in the student community? How many faculty are international? Maybe we say, um, and we can go on and maybe begin to think about our graduates when they leave, how fast do they take, for instance, to get employment? What is the impact of our graduates when they leave in terms of maybe so we can have lots of different criteria. So if that be the case, then you know, so we say if we are saying that we should be the ones churning out the most research papers in the continent, the best top journals per capita. That so what does that mean? So what decisions do we need to take? What actions do we need to take? For instance, if we want more research, how much budget of the university is going towards research? How many research organizations and other universities that are in research are we networking with? How much research, how much funded research, how many grants, research grants are we applying for? You know, for instance, we say, okay, you know, we learn research, people learn research, maybe for instance, when they have to take PhD. So he decides, okay, for the University of Nairobi, what is the percentage of their academic staff who have PhDs, for instance? So we do all these things so that we can say, okay, so what about resources? Okay, what about capabilities? Maybe they say from now on, we're going to make sure that for every faculty we hire professors, a professor who perhaps is attracting maybe what, $1 million of grants per year, for instance. So we can come up with all these kind of things and then say, okay, so this is where we are. So for us to achieve that, what plan do we need? So that's a strategy. So moving from point A to point B. So we have to think this is where we want to be in 5 years. What resources do we need? What capabilities and what we need to do? Okay, so it's a plan. It's a roadmap of the organization, direction that we intend to take, and the method to employ to reach the desired outcomes. Okay, so you look at the internal factors, the external factors, the impact organization. For instance, you look at what are the opportunities. So you want to make sure that we get, say, um, highly ranked students in this country. So what does that look like? What students do we have? What competition do we have? Then you look at ourselves. What is the internal capabilities? Why should students want to come at UN? What value are we creating? Okay, so that maybe you say, oh, we are weak because, for instance, okay, let me sit the elephant in the room. For instance, the halls of residents are not very conducive. They can be improved, you know, maybe tenfold, for instance. There's so much more we could do, for instance. So that the sporting facilities are not as good. They've come. I'm exhausted. Maybe I'll probably join you. Sorry, I'm being invited to a meeting, but I need to finish this. Uh, so internal factors, for instance, what is our strengths? What are our weaknesses, so that we can say, okay, let's address our strengths and how can we lessen our weaknesses. External factors, are there opportunities we need to try to get hold of? Are there threats? Are there competitors? Are there probably other, those kind of things? Okay, so then you devise a plan of action to capitalize on strengths and mitigate weaknesses. So just very quickly, without going into detail, I'm going to share this. For instance, let's think about an organization at the organizational level, because you can formulate strategies for organizations or at public level. Um, so, for instance, maybe you have an issue, you know, We're trying to assess the current state of cybersecurity, okay, so that we can more or less come up with a strategy to handle that, okay. Uh, so you look at the existing security measures, vulnerabilities, impact of threats, okay, and then we decide to have a strategy specifically towards this, okay. So what are the objectives? So we look at cybersecurity, we look at threats, for instance, uh, attacks, and then we are able to then put clear goals, maybe concerning issue attacks, enhancing data protection, compliance regulations, improving response, for instance. So those are clear objectives, so that we want to make sure we have a plan to address each of those ones. Okay, then maybe we look at initiatives that we need to take uh, so that we can achieve the objectives. Okay, for instance, so now this is now technical towards cybersecurity, manufacturing applications, strengthening network infrastructure, regular assessment, enhancing awareness among staff, training, things like that. So we more or less, and these are our objectives. What can we do to be able to reach those objectives? Then, of course, once we are clear about the initiatives and what resources do they need, okay? Maybe is it budgets? Is it hiring, trained and skilled professionals in cybersecurity? Okay, is it enhancing monitoring and evaluation, that kind of thing, or is it bringing intelligence? Tools, intelligent tools that can actually begin to address this. So that would mean we need to get resources, human resources, financial resources, to be able to do this. Then, of course, you need to have a plan for executing the initiatives. Okay. Then, of course, once you do that, you need to be able to communicate and to train, because we then have to begin rolling out and realizing it. So it's a plan, right? So it's a plan, it's a clear plan, so that there are strategies, and then the objective, their strategies, and a plan on how to reach then the resources. So we need to be able to obviously communicate that strategy to the whole organization. And of course, once we start, we need to be monitoring. So for that, of course, you need to establish key performance indicators. Okay, so that indicators to be able to, as we roll out these different things, what would be the indicators, different things, so that we can keep monitoring, and so that when you're going off course, we can be able to do something about them. So that is about strategy. We say that's at the highest level. Once then, of course, we begin rolling out our plan, as it were. It needs to be within guidelines. It needs to be within rules. It needs to be within processes. It needs to be within operations. The operational guidelines. How does it take place? How does then the organization run to be able to deliver, as it were, their mission, so to say? So we said rules, principles, guidelines to provide direction and shape decision-making processes. So these are operational. So this is not at strategic level. This is more at the operational level. The organization is running. We are, we are recruiting students. We are onboarding students. Okay, we are taking students through the learning process. We are conducting research. All right. So there will be operational decision making that is made. So consistent informed actions, quality, for instance, standard way of doing things. So there has to be an approach, so that we can, we can work towards those common goals. So we can't all be shooting in different directions. So we have to make sure, for instance, what are the standards that we follow. Okay. So that means there's a policy. This is how you do things. If you want to apply for UN, bachelor in computer science, what guidelines do you follow? When people apply, what is the criteria for admission? When people meet that criteria, so how do we go about it? How do they pay fees? How do they come to school? How do they take examinations? All those kind of things. So that's now policy, and everybody is expected to follow that policy. Okay, so different ways, governance, operations, conduct, management. Okay, so basically, yeah, so policy involve these kind of things. So let's think about what we were talking about. So that the scenario around policy, around cybersecurity. So of course we identified the threats, of course, and we more or less have a plan. But how do we plan to go about? What do we need to put in place? So of course, we need to gather information, conduct research, gather data, look at best practices, legal requirements, advancements. Then of course, what do we need? Okay, so you should be able to gather information. Then of course, we draft the policy. So for instance, what are the objectives, guidelines, say for data protection, roles and responsibilities for the different staff working there and the people working there, system updates, employee training, so protocols for incident response. So we're basically saying these are the guidelines. This is how we follow. This is what you're going to be able to do. So we're drafting the policy. Then of course we have to engage the stakeholders. For instance, the departmental heads, IT personnel, and everybody, so that people understand and people buy in, and people internalize it, and of course people possess it, as it were. They own it. Okay. Then of course, normally, we're just putting it in there. Normally, there'll be review and revision, so that it's not something set in stone. So as we roll it out, as we do monitoring and evaluation, as we find what's going on, it is actually something that we can be able to review. And if perhaps we find the issues, then we can, of course, always review and revise. And of course, the implementation, and then it's rolled out to the employees through training, that kind of thing. Then, of course, during the process, that strategic process, then of course we need to be able to do monitoring and evaluation to make sure that if we got off, then something can be done about it. So whereas they complement each other, there will be differences, and it's actually good for us to be able to get clarity on that. So policy is a set of guidelines or principles, okay, for the operational running of that organization or even management of that organization, okay. But strategy is a plan of action. It's a plan of action. Then, of course, the focus is the decision making within the organization, or it could also be within the society, or within, say, the government. For instance, it's possible to have, say, data protection policy of say, the University of Nairobi, but you can also have, say, the IT, the health IT policy, for instance. So that is, of course, going to be at the country level, or maybe at the county level, or the whole nation. Then, of course, for the strategy, it's about achieving specific objectives. So as objectives, they are goals. Okay, we need to be able to achieve. The scope, multiple operational areas, that is, of course, because it's about operations. So think about it. If say you have a says they're probably going to be different policies. Yeah. For instance, University of Nairobi has number of policies. There's one on say, uh, student admissions. There's a policy on examination. There's a policy on research. Okay, there's a policy on say entrepreneurship. Okay, so there are lots of different policies because there are different operational areas. Strategy will be specific goals or initiatives. So there is a strategy, it has objectives, it has each of them, there are strategies for each of those strategic objectives, and how do we go about arriving at it. Time frame is normally, if you, for instance, think about the policies of an organization, they gel with time. They get, they're operational, their guidelines, their best practices. So they kind of, after a while, they're stable. Okay, of course, you change as you go along, but they are more stable. For the strategy, it keeps changing because the society is changing, the context is changing, the threats are changing, opportunities are changing, focus is changing. So that means that's how come you find that policies, most organizations, the policies, 5-year term policies, I'm sorry, strategies. Okay, every 5 years, you come up with a new strategy based on the environment and what's happening, the context. In terms of detail, policy has detailed guidelines and procedures. In terms of strategy, it's high-level roadmap for strategy. Purpose, ensure consistency and compliance. That is consistency and compliance for people working or rolling out of services and products and how we do things. But the purpose for the strategy is to achieve competitive advantage. Okay. For instance, I was talking about UN, you want to make sure that we are the top universities in Africa. And that, of course, it's not just for show, but it will mean, for instance, when, say, uh, researchers out there are looking for collaborators, they will knock our doors fast because they say these ones are potential because they seem to have expertise. If, for instance, the World Bank wants to hire a research organization to carry out certain research in certain area, they probably will come here. Okay, though. So, if for instance, a Mastercard is rolling out some philanthropic initiatives in Africa, and they're looking for partners to help them to do that, they'll come, that kind of thing. So it's competitive advantage. In terms of implementation, we provide framework for decision making because it's about decision making both at management level and how we actually operate and do things. For the strategies, guides, resource allocation and planning. So how much money shall go into research? How do we balance the resources for learning, teaching and learning, and for instance, for operations, running the organization. So those kind of things. Then, for instance, employee conduct policy. For instance, there's a policy on health delivery. For instance, here there's a health on research. There's a policy on research. There's a policy around examinations. Okay, so there'll be different kind of policy. But for strategy, for instance, there'll be a marketing strategy. Okay. Decision making. So policy that governs decision making process, but for strategy guides decision making towards goals. So it's clear towards how do we attain the goals? How do we put in resources? Who do we need to? Who will be our partners? Who do we need to employ? Who do we need to bring in as consultants to enable us get there? Okay, so that's just to make sure we get clarity between a policy and a strategy. But we want to think about policy for us, because I think it will help us unpack a lot of what we want to learn around ICTs and their effects and consequences in society. So, to come up with a policy, we need to do policy analysis. Okay, that could well be at the organizational level, but it could also be at the country level. Okay, so for instance, we have a health policy, and we may even have policy that, yeah, a health policy. We have an educational policy. That's maybe higher education policy. We have a research policy, a research and innovation policy at the government level, at the country level. So for us to do that, then we need to carry out analysis to be able to raise these guidelines and best practices on how we operate, how we manage things. So a process of identifying potential policy options that could address your problem, then comparing those options to choose the most effective, efficient, and feasible one. So we need to come up with a policy. So we have to carry out analysis to identify options that we have. Then we can go ahead and choose the most effective. So for us to do that, how do we come up with the options? So there's a process we need to go through to be able to identify the options that we can be able to choose the best. So we want to just think about, before you go look at the process, who should be involved during policy analysis? Well, we involve people, okay? Not, for instance, people can provide an art interpreting information about the policy. So, for instance, subject matter experts, okay? If, for instance, we're talking about what you're talking about UN, who would be the experts in this? So, experts in research, experts in research and learning, experts in running universities, experts in establishing ways that we can work with others. Maybe people who can tell us how some of the top universities in the world, what have they done? What do they do to be able to operate in such a way that they operate? So maybe economists, for instance, you're talking about at the county level, because ultimately we have to think about resources and, okay, community partners. Okay, and by community, I mean whatever. Is it at the organizational level? Is it at the, at what level are we talking about? What is a community? What is a context? So these people will then are there to provide and interpret information that one needs for policy analysis. Okay, so you clearly identify what it is you're addressing, and then these people are coming to interpret the information so that they're able to advise you. Maybe even among them, they will be consultants in certain areas. Secondly, there are people affected by the policy. Okay, community members, for instance, if you're thinking about University of Nairobi, the students are affected by the policy you're going to come up with. Faculty are affected by, the people that we're going to work with, and maybe who are some of the people who work closely with University of Nairobi. Okay, so we may need to consult them on that. Partners that we have, then of course local decision makers. Okay, so for instance, you're talking about senior management. May well also be, for instance, the government, some of the people that we work with, say in the ministry, for higher education department, maybe the PSAs or some of those senior people who we interact, and then they'll be able to clearly they will have an impact. So this second group of people, they provide contextual knowledge such as social, education, and cultural perspectives. So perspectives that we need to think about, because it is them who are going to be affected by the operations and the practices that will be guided by what we're about to come up with. Third, lastly, the people who administer the resources related to this. For instance, say, if you're thinking about University of Nairobi, public officials, administrators. Yeah, we get maybe what 60 to 70% of our capitation from public coffers. Okay, from the Ministry of Education, so to say. And so, you probably want to think about such people. Okay, um, and perhaps other people who we get the resources from, for instance. So it should be important for us to do that. So these ones help you understand the potential economic and budgetary impacts of the policy options being considered. So for instance, we say this is what you want to do. So we need resources, but well, if the government says we are only using the new funding model to fund you, you can say what you want to do. You want to establish a resource, a health research center, that is doing this, or maybe we want to establish a teaching hospital, research and teaching a research hospital, for instance, for UON. Well, that will require resources, right? But what if we don't, we don't have public resources to do that? The government tells us, you know what, unless you fundraise and they generate income, that's not going to happen. So you need to be able to talk to people at that level. The legal landscape around potential policies, so engaging, the legal fraternity. Maybe what is the legal context, okay, around education, higher education, and all those kind of things. So you need to be able to understand that. So, yes, so basically, we're talking about, the people affected by the policy, the people who can help us, as it were, interpret the information, and of course, the people who would be partners in giving us the resources. So we think about the process. So we said for us to be able to come up with a policy, we need to do research, okay, on possible policy options so that we can identify a number and then select one which we think is best. So we review research literature around your area. So there is reviewing literature, research literature, what is known about this area. What is known about research, for instance, how universities carry out research? What is known about funding research? What is known about increasing research output? What is known about better learning outcomes for students, for instance? What is known about, for instance, funding higher education research? What is known about attracting research grants, as it were? So that we look at research that exists, the knowledge that is known. Then, of course, we need to carry out an environmental scan. Okay. So, for instance, let's look at the education sector. Let's look at the higher education sector. Let's look at what's happening at the ministry. Let's look at the other universities, for instance. Let's look at research organizations, public research organizations. How are they funded? Let's look at let's look at what, for instance, commercial university education is saying. How do we, so you need to be able to look at that whole scan. We need to also to be able to look at best practices. Okay, so let's think about the top universities in this country, the top universities in the region, the top universities in Africa, maybe a few top universities in the world. So you need to find out what are the best practices for teaching and learning, for doing research, okay, for attracting students, for attracting research funding, those kind of things. So we need to be able to look at best practices because ultimately we want to make sure that we're delivering quality. What are there standards that exist? Okay, so what are the other communities doing? So then, of course, once you are able to identify that, then of course, describe possible policy options. So, for instance, okay, this was basically around health, but pay attention to the impacts, okay, of the policy. So, for instance, the the impact, say, of the teaching and learning, the impact of your research, impact, as it were. So, what impact, are we going to have? So then we say you're going to put in these resources. What is the impact in terms of research, in terms of innovation, in terms of better learning, in terms of our graduates getting, taken up by industry and stuff like that. Cost of implementation, of course, because it will require resources, right? The feasibility of each option. So you look at the option in terms of, okay, this is the impact. Okay, this is the option in terms of, this is the practices, this is the impact, this is the cost. And then you look at, okay, that's the impact, is the cost. Is it feasible? Feasible in terms of resourcing, but also feasible in terms of rolling out. For instance, we say we want to make sure that maybe we talk about the issue of writing grants. Okay, that's jargon, perhaps for you, but say Melinda and, okay, sorry, Gates Foundation, they're making a call, say, for people to research and come up with ways to be able to have interventions in a certain health issues that is being stubborn, say, in a certain part of Africa, right? So the research needs to be done. So they're saying we want you to, for the next 3 years, we need to do this. We have this kind of budget. So write a proposal. It's called grant writing. So supposing this is something that we want to increase, but we don't have grant writers. We never really trained by grant writers is the researchers who have the capacity, the capability, the skills, and the competencies to be able to do that. So in that case, then perhaps the feasibility is going to be an issue, unless, of course, we want to say, okay, we want to be able to then attract people to come and do the training for the faculty to do that. I don't know whether that's a question or it's I can't see the. Oh, Tevin, you are reminding us when it's a bit, I forgot to record. I'm almost done. Maybe next time I'll do it. I think it's a little late. So I hear you, Tevin. So what I'm gonna do is, of course, I'm awaiting this one, and secondly, I'm probably going to avail to you some documents to help you unpack, right? Like, for instance, I'll avail the strategy, UN strategy, I'll avail a policy, a number of policies, and then I will actually avail some documents around policy analysis and examples. Okay, so I will not leave you in the blind. And I know that right now this is looking like, what is this? Now, the way that we want to do this is that we'll give us certain areas around ICT in society, okay, in government, in organizations. We'll give your team a certain area and we'll task you to more or less be able to come up with a policy. But if you look at what we've talked about, there's going to be research, right? There's going to be talking to people. It's going to be looking at existing research, existing knowledge, looking for, so in the process of doing that, then you shall actually be going through this unit. Okay, so there are different aspects, and we shall just be pointing them out so that you can be incorporating them. So that's basically why we're doing this. So it's going to be a process, and you're not going to be left on your own, as it were. We're going to work together, but you needed to get this overview before we can begin. Okay. So there'll be examples, and of course, we shall work slowly together. It's going to take the next 10 weeks or so. Okay, and then again, it's going to be a narrow area for you. It's not going to be this huge thing for whole organization and stuff. Okay. Okay. So of course, it's the ranking. So you look at the different options. So you come up with options for impacts, economic benefits, okay, or for that matter, then of course the budgets, the impact, the feasibility. Okay, so you look at each of them for impact. What is the impact of this option? What are the economic implications, budgets, the impact? So all these ones, so that if you then can look at, maybe you have 5 options, then you look for, for each of these options for these different things, then you can be able to rank them based on the criteria. Okay, all right. And remember, you're talking to stakeholders, right? So they probably will give you guidelines. For instance, you talk to people who are going to be affected by this policy. You talk about people who are like consultants, like experts, so they'll be able to provide guidance. Then, of course, there's going to be ranking. They're saying it's going to be partially subjective because, for instance, if you're coming up with policy for UN, well, we are UN, you're part of us. How objective can we be? So for us to make sure there's a bit of objectivity, then we need to make sure that we are systematic. So in some cases, you're saying your review may reveal a clear winner, something that is feasible, has strong impact, say on public education, then is viable, both in terms of economics and in terms of budgets. Okay. Or maybe in other cases, there may well be there's no clear winner, but there may be trade-offs. Maybe they are good in terms of impact, but maybe the budget is an issue. Maybe it's good in terms of the budget. Maybe the feasibility is much more difficult. Okay, so that there's going to be a bit of a trade-off. Then of course you can choose what is best. Okay. Okay. This is more of an overview. I'm going to share this, and I'm going to share a number of documents, background documents, part of where we're getting this from, so that you can maybe look at it, think about it, and have this as a reference, so that when you start, moving this or walking this journey, then you be able to do this. Okay, so that's what we want to be able to do after this. But it was basically a high-level introduction, but the main thing is around understanding policy and then thinking about policy analysis, okay? And getting an idea about policy analysis. And the reason is that we shall be thinking about different areas around ICTs, implementation, effects, consequences, outcomes, and stuff like that. Remember, this is ICTs and society. Um, so, so we'll be looking at different aspects of this, and then you want to then think about them when you're doing your research around this policy element you shall be looking at. You want to think about who are the people that would be best placed to give me some insight or some information about this. So that is the reason why we thought it's important for us to get an overview of the policy analysis process. So I want to end there for today, and let me get any feedback, any questions, any questions before we finish. Basically around policy and around policy analysis, or things you want clarified, or something which is not clear, or concerns. Feedback. Devin says it's heavy. I don't know what that means. It's Chinese. It's passing over your head. I know it's the first time you're getting this, but let me get some bit of feedback or question or comment. Are you there, or you're working and just putting the machine on?
Yeah.
We are working. Craig, some comments?
A comment for me is I've seen the point of strategy and policy. The strategy is more of, yes, if it's a plan, but it's a plan towards the action, like the actual actions they're going to do. Then for policy, it's a plan to guide the action. So like policy, plan to guide the action, strategy, plan for the action.
Thank you, Craig. So what I'm going to do is, and again, my apologies, next week, God willing, the classroom, the Google Classroom should be up. But I'll send this through Gloria. So I'm going to send two different policies, and to make it easy for UON, things that you can really relate to. Okay. Just to get examples, it's a little abstract. Like I'll share the UON data privacy policy. So that is something closer to you, closer home. You can look at it. I'll share with us the incubation policy of the University of Nairobi. Because again, that is something hopefully you can begin to think about and relate to. So that at least you can look at organizational policies for UON, and then, so we deconstruct it. It's not out there. You look at the different elements. Then I'll share our strategic plan 2010. I wanted to share the latest. I know it's the senior management recently rolled it out, but it's not yet on the intranet. But I got one. But it's just to give you a feel, okay? It's a bit old, but just to give you a feel of the strategic plan. And then I'll share these slides, of course. Then I'll share a guide on policy analysis. And basically, I'm getting that from CDC, okay? So I'm not just throwing something out there. I'm getting one. No, it's actually analytical framework from CDC. So that one is in health, and so it's clear, it's a bit more down to earth. Then, of course, I'm going to share another document on guide to policy analysis, which is more generic. So at least you have an idea, okay? So I have an idea to start you off, okay? So I thought I'm going to share that shortly. then at least you have that. Just store that. We're going to have them, of course, on the classroom, but you can just have them and begin to look at them. Any other comment before I let you go? Okay, any other comments? Let me let you go. Then I'll share some documents. Then we get to meet next week. Thank you very much.